Unveiled at the conclusion of the Summer Game Fest, Resident Evil Requiem, the ninth installment of the renowned franchise, is heralded as the beginning of a new era of survival horror anticipated for release in 2026. Powered by the latest technological advancements and the proven expertise of the Capcom team, this new episode promises an experience more immersive than ever, featuring complex characters and ambitious storytelling. However, for the time being, this new era remains shrouded in mystery. The first trailer features Grace Ashcroft, an FBI analyst and daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, in a devastated Raccoon City, the original setting of past horrors. As we await more details, only a few gameplay snippets, trailers, and developer statements provide a glimpse into what could well redefine the genre's standards. According to the information provided, the plot of Resident Evil Requiem begins in the abandoned Wrenwood Hotel, a macabre setting where the body of a victim apparently suffering from an unidentified disease is found. It is here that Grace Ashcroft, an FBI technical analyst, is sent to investigate. However, the case quickly becomes personal. This hotel is also where her mother died 8 years ago. Determined to confront the ghosts of her past, Grace visits the site, unaware that she is about to reopen the wounds of a much larger disaster. Her investigation will lead her to uncover a deeply buried truth, that of the biological disaster of Raccoon City, which shook the world nearly 30 years earlier during the events of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Requiem then poses the question, will this finally be the chapter that allows the memories of this dreadful catastrophe to find peace? This is what the game will reveal upon its release. In Resident Evil Requiem, the developers have introduced the concept of addictive fear as one of the pillars of the gameplay experience. The game presents addictive fear as a type of fear so well mastered and immersive that it becomes enjoyable, captivating, and irresistible to the player. It is not a brutal or purely shocking fear, but a broadly psychological, progressive fear that plays with the player's emotions through the embodiment of the protagonist, creating a heavy and subtle soundscape, moments of prolonged tension rather than constant jump scares, and an unsettling narrative that compels the player to uncover what lies behind the horror. According to their interviews and statements, the developers explain, "We want the player to feel a fear that does not repel them, but rather compels them to continue. This type of fear is addictive because it activates both tension and curiosity." They compare this to watching a horror movie that one cannot stop watching even though it is frightening, because one is too emotionally invested. It is a sensory and psychological fear that raises adrenaline without necessarily causing rejection. For gameplay, it retains the iconic mix of the series, exploration, resource management, and combat, but introduces several innovations. Dual perspective system. For the first time in the main series, players can switch between first-person and third-person perspectives at any time via the options menu. This flexibility caters both to fans of the immersive first-person horror of Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8, and to those of the third-person action of Resident Evil 4 and other remakes or the camera change previously in Resident Evil Village. Previews suggest that the first-person view enhances the feeling of vulnerability and immersion, particularly in confined and dark spaces, while the third-person view offers a more intense action mode. The survival horror style in these installments is based on the fundamentals of horror games. The protagonist, Grace Ashcroft, is a fragile and clumsy FBI technical analyst, not a seasoned veteran like Chris Redfield, Leon Kennedy, or Jill Valentine. Previews indicate that she has undergone basic combat training, which will be useful in confrontations, and gradually introduces Grace to combat scenarios. This corresponds to a return to the roots of the survival horror of Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8, these techniques favoring ambient tension, resource scarcity, and puzzle solving rather than action. However, reports suggest that there is a second playable character in Resident Evil Requiem. Following the appearance of Raccoon City, the first candidate chosen by fans is Leon Kennedy, due to his connection with the city in Resident Evil 2. However, immediately after Grace Ashcroft appeared in the first trailer, fans were furious with this decision made by the developers. Koshi Nakanishi, the game director, explains that they would have liked to make Leon the hero, but it would be difficult to create a horror game around such an experienced character. Leon is not the type to be scared, and no one wants to see a fragile Leon. This goes against what they want to offer, an immersion into fear through the character. It is worth noting that in the movie Resident Evil Death Island, which takes place in 2015 according to the events of the story, Leon Kennedy is stronger and too agile in his dodges and jumps. The reasoning for not including him is logical and coherent. Leon Kennedy, Claire Redfield, Jill Valentine, Carlos Oliveira, Sherry Birkin, or Ada Wong would be poor candidates unless Leon Kennedy or other characters have cameos, flashbacks, or a side mission. Perhaps we can have horrific sequences with Grace and more action-packed and combat sequences with Leon if we follow this lead, but there is another track closer to the developer's vision in this installment, which is to introduce another character already revealed in the trailer, Grace's mother, Alyssa Ashcroft, who we can embody in flashback sequences. Recall that this character is playable in Resident Evil Outbreak and appears in the upcoming Resident Evil Requiem, not to mention the 2 articles she wrote found in Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village for the Dolby Daily newspaper. This investigative journalist is capable of using a lockpick to unlock doors and defend herself with melee weapons and firearms. A notable element is the presence of stalkers, relentless monsters pursuing Grace, reminiscent of Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, Nemesis in Resident Evil 3, or Lady Dimitrescu in Resident Evil Village. We have here a massive creature so large that it must bend down to pass through doors and occupies all the space in narrow corridors, somewhat like the deformed fetus baby that Ethan Winters encounters in the Beneviento house, or the huge monster in the second teaser of Silent Hills, or PT, at TGS 2014. According to the developers, the creature's intelligence is compared to that of the xenomorph from Alien Isolation. Early gameplay demos show Grace fleeing rather than fighting, creating a sense of helplessness comparable to the beast in Amnesia: The Dark Descent, or Sakura Head in Silent Hill: The Short Message. Some fans fear that an excessive reliance on stalking mechanics could turn fear into frustration, if not balanced by opportunities to retaliate or outsmart the enemy. Although terrifying, stalking risks becoming repetitive if not balanced by varied gameplay. Fans cite Nemesis from Resident Evil 3 as a model, where strategic preparation could temporarily neutralize the threat. The inventory system should return to a classic-inspired inventory management, suggesting adjustments typical of Resident Evil. The game will likely move away from the briefcase system as in Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil Village, but will probably resemble that of Resident Evil 7, where Grace uses her inventory with very limited space, which she will improve during the game with the help of a backpack and the possibility of being equipped with the Genomic Codex, a device programmed to monitor the health of its wearer and receive calls. Expect scarcity with rigorous management of ammunition, healing items, and puzzle-solving keys. The notable mention of this demo, an iconic item, echoes the franchise. The use of a lighter in lighting dark places, a reference to Resident Evil Veronica, before using the flashlight subsequently, and also using it to solve and unlock passages like in Resident Evil 0, 1, 2, 3, and Resident Evil Outbreak. The game returns to Raccoon City 30 years after its destruction in Resident Evil 3. The setting includes iconic locations such as the ruined Raccoon City Police Station and the Wrenwood Hotel, where Grace investigates mysterious deaths linked to her mother's murder. The atmosphere leans heavily towards intense horror with dimly lit corridors, flashing red warning lights, and gothic architectural elements evoking the classic aesthetic of Resident Evil. Returning to the action locations, we know that the places to visit in the game, according to the visuals, are certainly Wrenwood Hotel, where she should go, according to the main plot, and Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center, according to the landmarks mentioned in the place where she is imprisoned. Returning to the iconic location Raccoon City, it could offer a perfect opportunity to reintroduce classic zombies in a more frightening and modern way. The creators could exploit the post-apocalyptic decor of the city, with zombies wandering in ruined streets or in abandoned buildings. The zombies would not be mere enemies to be shot down in large numbers, but slow and relentless threats that create an atmosphere of constant fear and tension. The previews depict the chilling and oppressive environment where Grace's audible fear, for example her gasping and soothing breaths, enhances immersion. The upgraded RE engine, now the RE NXT engine, delivers stunning graphics with realistic facial expressions, skin textures, and high-fidelity details such as sweat droplets, leveraging the power of next-generation consoles. The game prioritizes cinematic realism with detailed environments and character models. This is the first main Resident Evil to completely abandon last-generation hardware, offering larger play areas, faster loading, and advanced AI according to developer statements. However, some previews note that the limited duration of the demo presented by Capcom has cast doubt on the bold new direction, suggesting that the full game's ambition may not yet be fully realized.
While the previews praise the atmosphere and graphic of the game, some express skepticism about its direction. Grace's vulnerability, Grace's timid and introverted nature sets her apart from traditional Resident Evil protagonists, but some fans fear that her lack of combat prowess might make the gameplay restrictive or less engaging than in more action-oriented titles. Her character development, particularly her ability to overcome fear, is a central point, already elaborated in Resident Evil 7, with Ethan Winters struggling to survive, and his wife Mia Winters taking over in the 6th area, Rex Ship. However, more action-oriented phases will be dedicated to seasoned characters like Chris Redfield in the final section or chapter of Resident Evil 8.
We are aware that the emphasis on Grace's personal connection with Alyssa Ashcroft suggests a narrative experience, potentially exploring trauma and memory, which could enrich the narrative depth of the series. But what intrigues is the fate of the franchise's pillar characters. Perhaps their involvement will be honorable for the celebrated 30th anniversary of the series in 2026, possibly creating a narrative climax. Koshi Nakanishi's statement highlights that many first-generation characters have either lost their lives or undergone significant changes due to past events. This announcement has a strong impact as it evokes well-known traumas experienced by fans, such as those faced by Rebecca Chambers, Leon Kennedy, Chris, Jill, and Carlos, as well as all other members of the Alpha and Bravo teams. These characters, who initially thought they were dealing with simple murders, actually experienced an unimaginable disaster. Flashback images shown in the Capcom Spotlight, featuring characters like Claire, Jill, Ada, Carlos, and Sherry Birkin, are mentioned, reinforcing the idea that this game will be strongly tied to the series' history, rooted in the Umbrella plot and the zombie epidemic in Raccoon City. Koshi Nakanishi interprets this insistence as a way to reassure fans and tell them that the game will not deviate and has a strong will to conclude the story in the best possible way. This game is presented as a tribute for the 30th anniversary of the franchise, aiming to respect the lore and meet the expectations of longtime fans, while also appealing to the new generation. As Resident Evil 9 Requiem is announced as the ultimate chapter of a trilogy that began with Resident Evil 7, a major question arises. How will Capcom manage to integrate all the iconic characters of the saga into this final installment without compromising narrative coherence or gameplay balance? According to the official timeline, Resident Evil Death Island, set in 2015, marks the last grouped appearance of legendary heroes such as Leon S. Kennedy, Jill Valentine, Claire Redfield, Chris Redfield, and Rebecca Chambers, all still active in the fight against bioterrorism. Yet, only Chris and Ethan have been prominently featured in recent games, notably in Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village, leaving most historical figures aside. Ada Wong, for example, has not been seen since Resident Evil 6, 2012 to 2013, where she played a major role in the global events related to the C virus. Her return could be complex to justify without a solid parallel plot, especially since her ambiguous allegiance makes direct integration into a narrative arc centered on Ethan or the BSAA difficult. Sherry Birkin, who had resumed service as a DSO agent, has also fallen into oblivion, as has Carlos Oliveira, absent since Resident Evil 3 1998, despite his renewed popularity thanks to the remake. Should they be considered relegated to the background, or does Capcom plan an orchestrated return in an explosive finale? If Capcom truly wants to offer a fitting conclusion, it must find a credible narrative way to reunite these familiar faces, without resorting to mere fan service. A convergence of narrative arcs via a global-scale threat could be the ideal opportunity to involve the old heroes, each on a distinct front. Perhaps Requiem could function as the ultimate tribute to the franchise, showing these characters working together to prevent a final disaster. But each return must be justified, thoughtfully considered, and carefully integrated, lest the experience be burdened and the emotional impact of each iconic figure be diluted. Let's hope that all these characters will make their final appearances, concluding their narrative arcs, even though it's hard to say goodbye to these characters who have marked our minds for 30 years, and make way for the new generation with Grace Ashcroft and Rose Winters as transitional figures. Resident Evil Requiem aims to blend the visceral horror of Resident Evil 7 with the action legacy of Resident Evil 4, utilizing a dual perspective system and a vulnerable protagonist to refresh the formula. However, the limited demo cast doubt on its scope and balance and left some critics unmoved as it did not fully reveal the ambitious scope of the game. This raises questions about whether Resident Evil Requiem will fulfill its promise of a decisive evolution for the series. Nonetheless, fans are enthusiastic yet cautious, hoping that Capcom will deliver a consistent experience that honors the roots of the series while pushing boundaries. More details are expected at Gamescom, PAX West, and the Tokyo Game Show 2025, where a public demo might clarify the direction of the game. Thank you for following us. If you liked the video, do not forget to click like, subscribe, and activate the bell on our channel. Share your thoughts in the comments and follow us on social media.